I'd like to start with reflecting on something that Patrick just said, and he said, I quote, "This can't be done by one individual." And as much as I agree on that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're all here, I do feel that this would not have been possible without one individual, and I know he doesn't like this, but I would like to give you a big round of applause for Patrick for leading this community and inspiring us to do all this hard work. So thank you for that. All right, well, we had a good talk, but we've got a lot more in store for you today. We're going to kick off with a session on the European initiatives, and our first speaker today will be Carlos Diaz. Carlos is the founder of Synapse, and together with his great team, they are involved in both Eden and Darwin, and I think it's pretty safe to say that, like real synapses, they truly fire action potential into all of these projects to make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. Now, according to the bio on the Synapse website, Carlos has, and I quote, "wide experience in complex distributed project management, evaluation methods, business planning, and knowledge management." His work focuses on strategic and technical management of biomedical research, software development, and validation. Now, today, my fellow Odyssey friends, you guys are in luck because Carlos also teaches classes. And I'm guessing that if you want to attend one of these classes, you have to pay a lot of money for them. I'm not sure about that, but maybe you were just getting a free class today. So pay attention to see if you can learn from some of the magic that they're putting into these projects. Carlos, please come to the stage and share your story with us. Thank you.
That's about the best introduction I ever had. So, yeah, I need to have a conversation with Peter about going after Patrick, which is always the spot you don't want in any event. But I'll sacrifice myself for the sake of the rest of the speakers. Yeah. So, Eden, when I was asked to present Eden, which is something we have lived through with many of our colleagues for the past 4 years, almost 5 now. And I said, well, how long do we have? And then they said, well, 20 minutes. And I said, it's impossible. It's impossible to summarize everything we've done in Eden. And when I was actually trying to gather slides from the work package leads, etc., I realized it was really daunting to actually try to summarize everything that we've done. So bear with me because I will be surfing Eden a little bit, just offering. There were some things that Patrick already mentioned. I'll just be very brief and try to just give you the highlights of the project so far. I'm very honored to have been participating in this, probably the best IMI project I have ever run or managed. Again, you know, it's quite, in many ways, it's been mirroring the spirit and the structure and the community feeling of Odyssey. And I think that was by design, so we were designing Eden together with Peter and colleagues. Of course, Odyssey was always present in the room. We tried to make the best out of Eden in terms of being inspired by Odyssey. So this is something you probably already know. Maybe you don't know that Eden probably will be extended by 6 months. So now the new end date is going to be October next year for a total of 6 years. And there's been an increasing number of partners being added to the consortium. Especially pharmaceutical companies, which was great news, to be honest. The latest Lundbeck, Roche were examples of companies that were latecomers, but they are making really important contributions to the project, even though they joined at a later stage. But this is, you know, the typical, more or less, configuration of a consortium like this. You know, this is an Innovative Medicines Initiative project. Now IMI has been transformed into IHI. But essentially, the model of collaboration is similar. And the problem with that is, of course, you have a luxury problem for a while, say. I always say that this kind of project is a little bit a spoiled child because you have a budget, but you have it for a time. And I'll talk later about how do you continue from there, which is always a challenge. Essentially, if I had to summarize what we have achieved in Eden, I think that this can be represented in this slide. So there's essentially the very obvious creation of a network of data partners standardized to the OMOP common data model. But that's not all. There's been a lot of methods research as well. Again, you know, mimicking a little bit what happens in Odyssey. There's been a lot on training and education, very successfully, I would say. So we were trying to attack the data pillar, we were trying to attack the analytics pillar, so the knowledge. How do you actually want to use the data? What's the best use for the data, etc. We were trying to create the human capacity as well in terms of training and education, because databases by themselves don't do anything. So you need all of these people here and many more thousands worldwide to actually be able to become some sort of experts in managing not just data sets or healthcare data sets, but actually OMOP transformed data sets. And we realized that there's not that many experts out there, to be honest. And that's something we're still feeling right now. There's a little bit of a bottleneck on the human capacity component, and I think this is important to solve as a challenge over the next few years. And of course, there was the whole component of tools and infrastructure, so the whole IT thing, where the collaboration with OHDSI is, of course, very tight. And throughout all of those 4 pillars, there was the evidence generation. So the evidence generation, studies, study-a-thons, e-thons, I don't know how many thons we have, but we have a few. All of those are exercises in trying to use the data, put to test the methods, educate people even more. A lot of the studies we're doing, study-a-thons, etc., have a very definite training component to it. So there's the knowledge created, but also the number of people that are actually being trained hands-on on the use of the data. And of course, trying to test the software, tools, etc. So Patrick showed this already, which is quite impressive. I cannot tell you how much work it was to actually organize the calls, devise procedures, workflows, how to evaluate this number of applications. More than 500 applications. So I think the success here is, of course, the 187, of which more than 100, Monse tells me, are fully mapped now to the OMOP Common Data Model. The others are in progress. But I think the real success is the 500, maybe. So 500 institutions all across Europe were interested in a very obscure call that we invented. And that's no easy feat. It's something that is important to realize, because we started with a blank page, essentially. We didn't know how to organize these kind of calls, how to devise a sub-grant agreement, how would that work, would people respond to it or not? Actually, for me, that is a huge success. And of course, the geographical coverage that we have achieved is important as well, especially for some reason in places like Spain, Italy, UK, which have been in the lead for a while, actually. I think since call 1, they have been in the lead. So for some, I don't know if there's some cultural component to this, or that obviously was more implemented in those countries for whatever reason. In parallel to this, you know that we also organize calls for certification of SMEs. By certification, we meant training and evaluation of their capacity to help data partners map their data to the OMOP Common Data Model. So I think that was pretty successful as well. There were less calls, only 4 calls, for a total of 64 SMEs certified. Again, a huge number of applicants. I mean, there's not so many SMEs specialized or related with these kind of technologies and methods, etc., out there. We were surprised by the turnout, to be honest, as well. I think that's another success, and the geographical coverage is even more impressive than with data partners. In terms of, so that's all for the data pillar. Methods, it's impossible to summarize all of the papers, you have many posters here, you have many of the responsible people here as well. So you'll have plenty of opportunities, but of course there's been a lot of output coming from them, but also in collaboration with OHDSI, of course, in collaboration with other projects as well. So this is something that is, in terms of academic output, very relevant. In terms of training, there's an ever-changing number of courses for some reason. So we started with a figure similar to what Patrick showed, but then I was told that not all were courses. Some of them were playlists, which in my book, playlist is something like Spotify kind of thing. So, but they said, no, there's something called playlist, okay. So, in pure course, apparently there's 19 courses in the academy, and they cover, of course, the Eden Academy itself, skills, tools, methods. There's also courses for non-experts, so for lay people, etc., which I think were very interesting and an innovation. And over 4,000 students actively enrolled in the academy. You can see here where they come from. Again, pretty impressive, and I think this, again, is something that is synergistic with OHDSI efforts and efforts from other projects as well. On the tools, which was the 4th pillar that I showed, It's already been mentioned, the Eden portal continuously evolving, especially on the dashboard side of things. There's your contributions as data partners, all of the data partners present in the room and the others that are not present today, are contributing continuously to those dashboards, enriching them, contributing their data, etc. So it's a free resource, and the plan is, of course, that it keeps on growing and expanding, adding functionality, connections with the academy, connections with information about studies, etc. So I think this is a very important resource as well that we're actively using as well, for example, in Darwin and other initiatives, and I think it's going to be used more and more. Probably there will be an explosion of use. And actually, recently we've also developed in Work Package 4 some activities in terms of user feedback, trying to gather, improve the user friendliness and different functionalities of the portal. So last but not least, of course, because that was the ultimate aim of all of this, was evidence generation. Yeah, bear in mind that in Eden, evidence generation was designed a lot to contribute to the development of tools, to the education, etc., more than for the evidence itself. But even though that was the original aim, so to serve as use cases for the tools and the developments in the project, there's been very significant evidence generation that has value, a lot of value in itself. This is just an example of the long COVID studyathon. I'm sure that you will have lots of information, but studyathon was a concept that I think originated in ODYSSEY, but we have really exploited in Eden because it's very useful to actually see how in a week, essentially, you can run from idea to evidence and potentially a paper, not in the week, maybe some months later. So the studyathon model, say, is very useful to see how quickly and reliably one can generate evidence using the toolings. More example outputs of the studies. This is not very interesting for my presentation, but you have lots of posters and papers out there that you can actually check. So in total, probably the stats will be a little bit shaking, but it's around 70 methodological and scientific publications. And some of the upcoming studies as well, in the same way that Patrick was calling for people to actually think about ideas for potential studies, things they want to know, trying to leverage the huge potential of the worldwide network that ODYSSEY represents. There's also a number of upcoming studies on heavy menstrual bleeding, alopecia areata, pediatrics research, and the first ever, maybe the last ever as well, Eden Mega Study, because we're finishing the project, but the Eden Mega Study, which is trying to get as many data partners as possible around a research question. Let's see if we can get 100 data partners doing a study together. It is very ambitious. I don't dare to ask Monse about how many people have enrolled themselves in the mega study. More than 30, I'm told. So already one of the biggest studies, if not the biggest, But yeah, I mean, there's space for more, I think. We want to reach at least 50 or something like that. So that we can present next year in this venue, maybe, the results of the mega study. A lot of effort in terms of communication, thanks to colleagues, Richard, Michel, you somewhere over there. Great work in terms of creating all kinds of communication channels and tools that I think benefit, again, the community, help to tightly integrate everyone in this very multidisciplinary group. And then the future of Eden, just to conclude my presentation. So again, as I said, IMI is a fantastic framework for public-private collaboration, but it creates a little bit the feeling of a spoiled child in the sense of what do you do? How do you transform that child? Had the luxury of a certain budget. In the case of Eden, it was not a huge budget, but it was impressive enough to actually be able to do all of these things. And how do you transform that child into an adult? And this is the whole problem of sustainability. Many people say, well, I'll just prolong the teenage years, yeah? And I'll just ask for a project number 2. Or I'll just say, pharma should pay forever and then leave the room. right? And these are the two main, the usual sustainability solutions out there. Well, we felt that probably there was space for something a little bit more sophisticated than that. So, there was I think that there's the awareness out there that Eden has value and that it should be continued. And essentially what we did was create the Eden Foundation with this vision, mission, and values. I think that there's nothing too striking here. But essentially what we try to do is to create a legal entity that can actually be created during the project itself. So the whole idea was to try to cross-fade the project with the foundation activities. That means that we have to transition some of the activities from the project to the foundation progressively. So what we do essentially in the context of Work Package 6 is to try to devise the business case for each of the assets or the value streams that we created in Eden, namely, for example, training, certification, studies, etc., and see whether they have possibilities of future exploitation in some way. And exploitation doesn't have to mean commercial exploitation. There can be different ways of exploiting results, and then see whether they by themselves can be transitioned to the foundation. This is a little bit the blueprint of the foundation. I think that probably that has been presented earlier before in other events. But essentially we saw that there was like two sides to the foundation, because there's a number of activities that are more enabling activities, like training, so in academy, development of vocabularies, the community efforts, etc., which are all very necessary and very nice and very difficult to fund. Yeah, so we'll have to be aware that the money doesn't flow easily for these things, yeah, except if you have public grants and that kind of stuff. So there's the research side of things, which may generate more revenue, all within the not-for-profit context, of course, and that is about generating studies essentially in different ways. The current thinking about studies is that there may be a layered type of service provision, and that goes from the simplest, which is the advisory, so just pure guidance, pure advice, through data landscaping. Data landscaping is a lot about creating a kind of heat map of the landscape of data partners, so trying to ascertain what the status of data, certain data variables of interest is. So kind of presence-absence, very simple assessment. Feasibility would be one step further, which would be a little bit the same thing, but with counts. We would have simple studies, we would have complex studies, we would have study-a-thons understood as training events more than anything else. So in-house training events, probably using internal databases, for example, in companies. And the most complex scenario would be the research program. Research programs would be more ambitious, would be devised as a multi-year investment in which you really want to dig into, not only into the generation of studies in a certain, for example, therapeutic area or disease or specific problem that we want to tackle, but also methodological research, trying to generate a community of data partners around a specific problem, etc. A little bit again, mimicking what is happening organically in Odyssey. So the current status right now is we have initiated the first research program actually on neuroscience, thanks to Lundbeck, and I think the Lundbeck people must be somewhere here. That was risky, but very generous of them, because it's the first research program and it will serve as a blueprint for all of the other research programs that can be created. We're discussing, as I said, the Eden value streams for transition to the foundation. Importantly, we are piloting all the procedures and workflows for prioritized services. So this is an idea that may change very easily, the layered services that I just presented to you. But I think it's important that people know where we're going, hence this presentation. We're setting up, of course, core teams, support teams. Bear in mind that the cross-fading idea is very nice, but essentially the foundation is right now with very limited resources. Yeah? So we have to create a core of resources that allow us to actually roll out everything properly. We are in contact with many data partners, probably many of them in the room, in terms of establishing memoranda of understanding with them, which are a precedent for the collaboration agreements that we will establish, so to create a kind of network that continues the Eden network into the future. And of course, having a legal entity opens also the possibility to participate in other European calls, etc. So last slide. I think I've said everything that I wanted to say, but essentially I'm very proud of Eden, and I think we all are. All the participants in Eden are very proud of Eden. We exceeded the expectations. You know, we set ourselves some targets at the beginning of the project. We have far exceeded those targets. I don't know, you know, by several fold actually. The response from the community was extraordinary, and our hope is that this project has served as a power boost that we wanted for the implementation of the OMOP Common Data Model in Europe, and I think the future is bright. So with that, thank you all. Thank you, and to the next speaker.
Thank you, Carlos. We will be taking questions at the end of the session. There's room for a little Q&A, so if you have any, write them down or keep them in memory. Thanks for that presentation, Carlos. I think it was a very nice overview of something that was a lot more complex than what you presented here, so that's very, very well done. The next three speakers all have something in common. And during the sessions this last weekend, I was already hearing a little bit of buzz going around. And it seems that within OHDSI, something is trending right now, and I think it's kind of the oncology, hematology stuff going on. So we have three speakers that are covering that area, and we'll see if, I'll have a look around for the posters later to see if I'm right, and maybe see if this is the area that's needing some development, or where a lot of stuff is happening at least. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting our next speaker the week before last, and she's already looking at me like, what are you going to do now? We met in a really lovely setting, but before I get into that, I'm not going to ask you to stand up like Patrick did. I'll just ask you to raise your hands, because otherwise it's been like, you know, our morning exercises. If this is your first time at an OHDSI in a face-to-face event, could you raise your hand for me? Wow. That's, I would say, almost half, if not more than half. Very, very special welcome to you today, because for me, I think one of the awesomest things about OHDSI is actually the community, and there's no better way to get to know the community than coming to one of these events. And that's also where I met Maaike. We met last week at the Real World Evidence Summer Course that was hosted in Oxford by Dani. There you are, Dani and his team. And I must say, I actually learned a lot, but what was even more fun was hanging out with people that are like doing the same kind of stuff. I've already seen some faces there that were also having a very good time. And you know, when you work hard during the day, you get to play hard at night. This is one of the places that we did it, and I think for any of you who have been involved in any kind of ETLing, this should be your mecca, right? I think we should have a yearly pilgrimage to the White Rabbit pub. I think, unfortunately, it's a little bit too small to host a symposium like this. But if you're ever in Oxford, you cannot be in Oxford and not go to the White Rabbit pub, right? So enough about that. Let me introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Maaike van Swieten. She holds a PhD in computational neuroscience, also from Oxford. So it's probably good for you to go back. And she currently works as a clinical data scientist at IKNL, which is our Dutch National Cancer Center. One of the things she is involved in is harmonizing rare cancer data. And she is going to tell us a little bit more about that. So, Maaike, if I can ask you to come up.
Okay, thank you, Renske, for not completely ruining my reputation. It's an honor for me to be here. So my topic will be to give you a little high overview of the EURACAN network. So let's just dive straight in. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll give you a high-level overview of what EURACAN is and also what we're trying to achieve within EURACAN. I'll give a short introduction into our data harmonization strategy and some of the challenges that we face, and also how we're trying to overcome these challenges using the community around us. I also want to put it into a bigger perspective, because obviously data harmonization is only a fraction of what we're trying to do with these European projects. And of course, I'll conclude and talk about some next steps. So EURACAN is a European reference network for rare adult solid cancers. It's a collaborative initiative to improve the diagnosis, treatment, and research for rare cancers. We currently have 75 data partners, and we're covering 10 of the 12 families of rare cancers. So together, that's about 75% of all the rare cancers. So why are we so interested in rare cancers? The incidence of rare cancer is quite low. The clinical manifestations are very diverse. And even though it makes up about 25% of all the rare cancers, we don't really know that much about it. The diagnosis is typically difficult. A lot of cancers are misdiagnosed or diagnosed at a very late stage. And knowledge is fragmented. There's very few experts per clinical diagnosis, and this is obviously one of the reasons why we have a network to bring together all this knowledge. We don't only want to bring together knowledge, but we also want to bring together data. And then obviously we face one big challenge that probably everyone is familiar with, and that is the lack of data interoperability. So let's take a look at some of the projects that are currently running. So we first started with the Starter project. It's a very small project, and that was basically to figure out what we're trying to do. These projects are slightly bigger, there's more funding, and we're trying to achieve even bigger things. So the Blueberry project is a 2-year project that started in September. We're trying to develop a blueprint for sustainable, effective, and scalable EURACAN registry. We have 7 data partners involved in this within Europe, and we're working on the OMOP common data model to standardize our data. And then the other project is IDEA4RC, also started in September. It's slightly bigger. It is a 4-year project with 25 data partners across 12 European countries. There's a larger emphasis on looking at the ecosystem that all the data will be held in. And therefore it's a bit more technical. We have 2 data standards that we're using, FHIR and OMOP, but the largest focus is on FHIR, so I'll probably not talk so much about it, but I think this is a whole topic, a whole new topic of conversation, harmonizing FHIR with OMOP, and all the challenges that come with it. So let's take a step back and see where the data actually comes from in our registry. So obviously we have the doctors that enter some data into the EHR, and eventually we extract the data from the EHR using a manual extraction with data experts or machine learning extraction. And then we have it into the data, into a registry. So this could be a clinical registry or a population registry. This is not the OMOP registry yet, so we still need to make that step. So we use the ETL, an extract, transform, load pipeline, to get the data into an OMOP common data model. And this is what Blueberry focuses on. So this is the starting point of the Blueberry project. So how do we actually get there is one of the big questions, obviously, that we're all dealing with. And that's called, obviously, data harmonization. So the first step of data harmonization is to think about what you actually want to harmonize. In the Blueberry project, we first sat together with a number of clinicians and actually asked, like, what is interesting to you? What are the research questions that we want to answer, and which data elements do we need for that? So we generated a core set of data elements that we want to map. And then the mapping fun starts. So these core data elements are then mapped. We ask for clinical feedback to improve the mapping and reduce the information loss. If items cannot be mapped, maybe we need to think about creating custom concepts and improve our mapping. And eventually we implement the ETL and then iteratively improve this by running data quality checks. This obviously looks familiar to many of you who are actually working on the data harmonization, but I want to mention it here because we don't only do this at local level for each of the data sources, but we also do this at a network level. And I think this is a little bit different from many of the European initiatives that are working on network studies, because they're typically fragmented databases that do all their own mapping themselves, and eventually they're brought together. So we repeat this data harmonization process within the network to optimize our mappings, ensure that we have a data set that's fit for purpose for our specific use cases. And also, obviously, make sure that the data quality is as good as it can get. The harmonization of data is challenging enough if you talk about one database. We're now talking about 7 different databases that have 7 different origins, 7 different countries, 7 different governance structures. You see where I'm going. It's quite difficult. And we're not even talking about the challenges that we're facing when we're talking about the legal frameworks. But let's have a look at the challenges in data harmonization. So I would say there's 3 types of challenges. We have challenges in terms of the mapping, in terms of the analysis that we actually can do once the data has been mapped, and also the challenges that you're just facing when you're working with a network of people who have different backgrounds, different expertise, different understanding of what data harmonization is and what OMOP might add to in terms of value. I chose to highlight 3 challenges just because I think it's important, and they're probably not unique to us, but I think it's nice to go over them. And this is obviously not an exhaustive list or anything. So there's a couple of challenges regarding missing data elements, data heterogeneity, and the data quality. So in Blueberry, we have 2 population databases and 5 clinical registries. So the population databases are green and the other ones are red. So the difference in these registries lies in the number of data elements that is available, the granularity of the information that is captured in these data elements, and also the duration of how long the journey is of a patient. So for example, population registries are very focused on the core diagnosis of cancer. They may have a first-line treatment, but they're limited in their follow-up. And also they may pay less attention to risk factors and comorbidities. But some might say that the quality of the population registry data is a bit higher because it's already gone through some standardization and cleanup by data experts. In terms of the data mapping itself, it doesn't really matter because you just map what's available. But then when you think about a network and you think about the studies and the research questions you want to answer, it is important to think about whether or not you can actually include all these databases into your research question. You don't want to end up with just one database that can answer your question and you've just gone through years of harmonization for nothing. So this is something that is very important for us to think about whilst we're actually in this process. We also see different coding systems in the different countries and within the different databases. And I just want to illustrate this with an example, and that example is tumor grade. So we found within the network that there's 2 ways of capturing a tumor grade. So we have an FNCL-CC score, which is a French grading system for sarcomas specifically. And in some other registries, we find a term that's called tumor grade. So if we look into what this actually means, we see that this French grading system is a combined score of 3 measurements. So this is a differentiation grade, the mitotic count, and the amount of necrosis that took place. And together, this eventually turns into a score that has a value from 1 to 3. If we look at the tumor grade in the other registry, we see it's just a differentiation grade. Interestingly enough, and maybe to make it more difficult, currently in the OMOP vocabulary, these 2 grading systems are mapped to exactly the same concept. They both have a value from 1 to 3 and would be used in exactly the same way. So that might not be a problem in a local setting, but on a network level that is probably problematic. So I think this is just to highlight that you have to think about it not just from your database perspective, but also from your network perspective. I'll come back to this in a minute. And then obviously everyone faces this problem where we say data cannot be converted to the OMOP CDM. And I want to highlight this with another example, and that is the ICD-03 codes. We've talked about this also in the weekend. But again, I just want to highlight this for the bigger audience. So the OMOP vocabulary is not extensive. Well, it's extensive, but it's not exhaustive. So we have ICD-03 codes that exist, but have not been implemented in the OMOP vocabulary yet. So if we look at one of the databases, we can see that the ICD-03 codes that are missing for all the cancers together, so that's the most left bar, it has as a consequence that about maybe 1% of the data will not be converted to OMOP. If we then look at a rare cancer, like a sarcoma, and I presented 5 different histotypes, we can see that the number of patients that would not be converted can become quite high. Overall, it's about 10 to 15%, but you can see that in some cases it's almost 25% of the patients that are currently not converted. So we're obviously, we need to do something about this. So one of the things that we do to overcome some of the challenges that we work together with the OHDSI community. So we are collecting these ICD-03 codes that are missing from the vocabulary within EURACAN, but also within other cancer registries. So if you have any, please come to us and we'll communicate with the oncology working group to get them into the OMOP vocabulary. The same goes with the grading system. We might have to add a different grade so that we can differentiate between the two. But we also ask them to have a look at our implementation of the model to ensure that whatever we do matches with whatever is done in the community in case that people want to join later or we want to join network studies. We also have collaborative efforts within the network. So actually quite recently in May, we organized our first little study-a-thon and we went over the mappings as a network, looked at the data quality of the network and also the implementation of the model. And we relied on some expert knowledge in terms of the clinical terms, but also the data experts that know the data to see if we can figure out some issues and maybe harmonize it even more. We have a collaboration with Eden. So one of these projects is developing an ontology platform for semantic mapping. And by that, I mean a way of maintaining and also sharing the vocabulary versions that are being used within our network and also maybe some custom mappings that we have developed within our network to ensure that everyone's using the same. All these points that I just mentioned, you can also look at the posters that are going to be presented in the afternoon in case you want to know a little bit more about them. As I said, data harmonization is basically the basis of a lot of the things that we're doing, but it's not the only thing. So we are obviously also working on the governance structure and legal framework of these networks and the data use agreements. Eventually, we want to implement a federated learning network. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute or two. And of course, the ultimate goal is to actually answer some research questions. And as a last point, we want to be able to continue with the efforts of the EURACAN registry beyond our funding phase. So we need to think about the sustainability and financial stability of the EURACAN registry. So this slide you've already seen before, but I want to put it into the context of where we're heading in terms of federated learning. So let's say you converted your data to OMOP. You have one data set first, and then hopefully you have more. And then eventually you want to run a network study. So this is a type of network study most of you are probably familiar with. You send a script to a data owner, they run it locally and send back the results. And I think this is a great way of running network studies. So what we're trying to do within EURACAN is that we want to make it a little bit more automated. So these data owners, these people, are now replaced by nodes. And they're basically sort of virtual machines that are connected to the OMOP database and to the other nodes within the network via a particular software. So we rely on the Vantage 6 software. I don't want to go into too much detail in terms of federated learning because of the time, but the idea behind it is that a researcher can now choose a standardized analysis method similar to what you do within OHDSI you send that to all the nodes at the same time, they're being executed, and you get back only one result, so one aggregated result, that is then easy to interpret, and it also allows us to increase the sample size of our data. And I think, especially when we're talking about rare cancers, this could be quite important because we're already struggling with low numbers. So before finishing up, I want to highlight some of the use cases or research questions that we're working on. So we started off with a very simple use case, just get the distribution of patients with sarcomas of particular histotypes. And I think this is already sometimes quite challenging, but I'm very happy that we can show preliminary results of 4 of the databases that we've converted. So this is an overview of 14 histotypes that we find within, or we don't always find, but that we classified initially for the 4 databases. And you can see that the more well-known or more common rare cancers or sarcomas, there's quite a good number of patients right now. Of the other ones, we still don't reach high numbers, but I think this is a great first start on 4 databases. Then we have 2 other the 2 other use cases. So one is more clinically relevant, where we want to complement a clinical trial with real-world evidence. So this is a STRAS-2 trial. But we also think about how we can add value to already existing apps. So this is, for example, the Circulator app. This is an app that's being used in clinical practice at the moment to estimate the prognosis for some of the sarcoma types. So to conclude, after 9 months of being in this project, we've converted 4 of the 7 databases, so I think that's already a very good start. And we successfully ran a small study-a-thon at the end of May with some preliminary results, so that's very, very exciting. Then obviously, we need to continue this effort and finish off the other databases, eventually implement this federated learning network that I just showed, and execute the use cases. And we probably do that first at ODYSSEY level, and then at the federated level. And hopefully, in the next ODYSSEY Symposium, I can present some exciting new results. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maaike. Thank you for sharing some of those challenges that you guys are facing, but also how you are overcoming them. And I think it's nice input probably for all the people in the oncology work group to motivate them even more to continue the great work that they are doing and to do some more endeavors there. Now, I had mentioned before that going to in-person events is a great way to meet up with the community. And there's one thing that I'm gonna plug a little bit more. Both Peter and Patrick, our 2 Ps, have talked about this. They're like 2 peas in a pod, right? They have talked about this before, and I'm gonna give a little bit of attention to our national nodes. And now I am going to ask the people who are working in a country listed here, if you can, please stand up. I think it's the last time we're gonna ask you to stand up, so before the coffee break. Okay, that would be about 3/4 to 80%. Oh, wait, no, I never said sit down. Now, those of you who have actually joined your national node in your country may sit down. Is this true? I'm not sure this is true. Anyway, for those of you who are still standing and you have not joined your national node yet, please go during the afternoon session to meet up with your national node representatives and see what you can do for your national node. Meet up with people in your country. The Dutch node had a really productive meeting yesterday. We had kicked around some great ideas. So it's a nice way to get to know people that are working in your country on ODYSSEY-related stuff. So our next speaker is definitely from a country with a national node that's been putting in some effort and trying to bribe people with alcohol, I hear, to join their node. This is big eyes. It wasn't me, says Lisbeth. And I've actually, over the last couple of weeks, I've been tipped by several people that I should be talking to Michel about his work that he's doing in both federate and HONEUR. So I'm very pleased that he is here today and that he is willing to share his experience with us about what, all the great work he's been doing. So I'm very honored to introduce Michel van Speybroeck. He works, as we say here, for Janssen, and I know all you American people say Janssen. He works for Janssen as a senior director of data sciences, focusing on federated data networks. He works in the public-private partnerships such as Eden and Harmony, and on disease-specific networks where Janssen is involved. So Michel, if I may have your presence on the stage.
Just one note of correction, that alcohol thing, that's according to healthcare compliance, not really allowed. So, okay, I'll try to explain you a bit about the work that we're doing on HONEUR and some of the other federated data networks. I have to say, however, it's also the small kid on the block, because you will see we're dealing with actually a relatively low number of patients compared to what we've seen in the other networks. But nevertheless, we're very proud. So HONEUR stands for Hematology Outcomes Network in Europe. So obviously, we're focusing on hemato-oncology data. In particular, to a large extent, actually, focusing even more on multiple myeloma. And the data partners that are part of the network, they are a mix, predominantly either registries or individual hospitals or groups of hospitals. And of course, it's intended to address a variety of questions. On the one hand, obviously, the questions that are living between the data partners itself, that's supposed to be addressed, but equally so the questions or the research question that we have also within our organization. Now, important, and I think Maaike already gave a very good view on that there are some very specific elements on working with those disease-specific data sets. So in particular here, hemato-oncology. So to be clear, we're focused, the concept of the T-shaped data, where on the one hand you have broad data across a large population, but then you also have that need to the very specific disease elements to enable research across the different dimensions. So in our network, we're specifically focusing more on those deep data elements. And what does that imply? Well, that often actually relates to specific variables that are more often than not captured as structured data. So one particular element is the regimens across the different lines of therapy. It's an absolute nightmare if you have to distill that out of the different systems. If we're talking about response progression, things like what we call minimal residual disease, the staging, whether it's information from imaging on number of lesions, the size of the lesions, cytogenetic risk factors, and so on. So some of those are indeed captured as structured data, but more often it's haphazardly collected and very often also part of clinical notes and so on. And so we're actually, to be clear, we're not applying extensive NLP in any of the mappings that we do. We're typically relying more often on either manual curation or the good old use of regular expressions. So now comes the big question, how do you scale that? So for going indeed also like Maaike illustrated from one data set that maybe you have to actually a large network. And so, yeah, unfortunately, but if there are people who have found it, I'm very interested, but I don't have a miracle solution. So we're actually still relying actually on the very traditional workflow of coming to those mappings. but also very much also in line with I think, again, what Maaike said. To that extent, I'm also a bit a benevolent dictator, although some might say benevolent doesn't really apply. But anyhow, you need to impose that standardization. Yeah? So OMOP is great, but actually, if you really want to harvest and be able to do quickly analysis without extensive adoption of how variables are exactly mapped, you really need to apply governance on top of those of actually the execution of the mappings. So another thing that we've done is that we didn't go in blindly. So we actually defined a predefined list of variables that were our primary variables that we wanted to have harmonized, to have focus. The other thing that we did, also in line with the first point, let's say, applying the conventions, but also the predefinition of the variables. We also made extensive use of the data quality dashboard, but we adapted that to also enforce and check on all the conventions that we had set for ourselves. So basically, with every mapping, we get also a nice report out that says in the same structure and format as DQD, yeah, you did not apply that convention, or we think that there is that you might have mapped this to another variable than what we said you should do, and blah 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 blah. And the other thing is that we also made like a twist to Achilles, to actually create a data profiler script which gives very specific insight into the variables, for instance, in the lines of treatment and so on, the variables that really matter so much to be able to do research at the end of the day. Now, how does our thingy look like? Well, this is, so we have on the one hand the central, call it the central part of the infrastructure. So yeah, that contains some of the key components are also a small data catalog. It contains the metadata, really who to contact and so on, and the governance process for these particular data sources. We have what we call a study catalog. That's really the core of it all. So that's where we create, let's say, a secure environment on which a particular study can be executed. You also define there with whom and what you collaborate with. And that's also where all the content really will be exchanged, whether it's a script that is generated to Atlas, or whether it's a bespoke R or Python routine, that's where it will be exchanged, equally so the results. We have then, like I said, that what we call data profiler to give you univariate insight, univariate data overview actually on the structure of the data. And equally so, on basis of the same thing, something we've also implemented also in Eden is the concept of a concept browser. So you can type in a particular variable and see, without disclosing the very small cell counts, actually, and what data sources a particular variable is present. We also have then on the counterpart a local part of that infrastructure, which basically has very much the same setup, but obviously also contains the actual OMOP CDM instance, and then an engine to actually execute the scripts, whether it's through, again, coming from Atlas, or whether it's something bespoke that can be executed. And you also have the ability to deploy locally dashboards. So what are the cornerstones of our approach? Well, a couple of things. So also very much in line with actually the principles that are being handled or respected in Odyssey. So one is traceability. I'm very keen actually on being able to trace the results from the actual, to be able to tie it up to a particular script execution, to tie it up to a particular data cut, so that if there is a need to go back, that you actually can indeed retrieve that chain. So we've engineered our solution to handle it that way. Of course, we're also very keen on transparency, so We don't want anybody to execute or to ask somebody else to execute somebody without giving them the full visibility and full transparency, actually, of what it is that we're sharing. The other aspect is what we call the reliability. So at least for certain use cases, we need to ensure that what we say that we want to be executed, that is also effectively what is being run, and that there are actually no modifications being done to that, especially also in light of the traceability, again, for certain use cases. And the last point, also very important, that we put quite a bit of work on, is to enable that it's easy to use. So we don't always have in all these departments, basically we're working with hematology departments, informaticians, IT people available. So it's important that the tools that we're offering can also be handled by non-technical technical people. The study execution itself is we have a standard flow, is actually very conventional. One thing, so you can again, using Atlas tools or whatever, the most important thing, for instance, is when we communicate results back, that we've developed an API to ensure that the data is being associated with the right script that is initiated in the first place. We also provided a simple, it's not so simple because we actually put quite a bit of work in it, a tool to analyze your own data, and that's really, again, geared towards the clinical community. We call it Disease Trajectory Analyzer, but what it does is it allows us basically any hematological indication to define what we call a clinical event model of use for that particular situation. So here I'm actually showing you a very linear model. So you can, to a certain extent, you can also compare it to what you would model in the event tables, for instance, with that difference here that this basically has a higher degree of flexibility. So you can define 2, 3, 4, 5 different event models as you see fit for studying your particular population. And what we do in the background is we're mapping the OMOP data then to that event model. On top of that, we then allow, in an easy way, to use cohorts or to slice and dice the population. So in terms of that cohort creation, we have a couple of possibilities. So first of all, we allow input and output from cohorts that are defined in the conventional Atlas environment. You can actually use a graph or a subgraph from that event model to say, okay, this is my cohort, or I want to compare those two. Or the third model is actually indeed what we call the interactive cohort creation in the tool itself. So basically it creates parallel plots to the variables of interest, and then you can graphically select the particular cohorts. And then when you're working with those cohorts in the disease trajectory analyzer, you can generate the simple table 1 overviews. You can do, or the graphical overview over time of your variables, or stage sequence diagrams, or indeed looking at the particular outcomes. So what else do we have in that toolbox available? So we have what we call an ECRF Lite solution, because we find that a lot of people don't always have all data sorted out. We see that there is a tremendous amount of Excels floating around also in these environments. So we provide a more, we think it's a more robust solution with actually an ability that people can also review their data and augment them as they see fit. We have also enabled already federated statistics, whether it's like a federated Cox regression or a logistic regression. And we're indeed also, like many others, are implementing federated machine learning. We're also looking at the synthetic data generation, especially as a kind of enhancement or add-on for White Rabbit, which is very focused on the univariate. So But as there is a lot of interdependencies between fields, we want to see whether with the synthetic data generation capabilities we get a bit further on that. And yeah, on the other side, we're also looking at the incorporation of NGS data, image analysis, and above all, the one thing that we also done with this is we've taken the abstraction of that HONEUR and the learnings and the capabilities, and we have what we call a platform called federated that we're also applying for other disease areas. So right now we do have 22 sites as part of our network. We have 55,000 hemato-oncology patients, about a good 40,000 actually with multiple myeloma. And last but not least, I want to thank especially the data partners, but also our business partners and the technical team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel, for this very nice talk. It was good to hear, see what's going on. I realize we are running a little bit late, so I will stop talking and quickly introduce our next speaker. Yeah, there we go. Do it this way. All right. We're very pleased to have Professor Monique Roobol with us today. She is Professor of Decision Making in Urology and also head of the Scientific Research Office within our Urology Department at Erasmus MC. She is epidemiologist by training and has a very impressive track record as a PI in European project, and she has a list of publications that I think most of us would take more than a few lifetimes to achieve. When I actually looked her up in PubMed, I was like, how many is that? That's a lot. Her research focuses on transforming clinical and patient-reported outcome data into easy-to-use prediction tools. We had a little chat about that earlier, and it's very exciting to see what she's doing. She will be speaking today about two of my IMI projects that she is involved in, namely the PIONEER and the OPTIMA project, and I think I'm going to stop talking and give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Let me see. Okay, I can see the screen without my glasses, so that's good. Well, good morning all, and I will try to not take too much of your coffee break. I'm going to talk about PIONEER and OPTIMA, two IMI projects that are run by the European Urology Association. And I think I will leave it like that, and I will start with the PIONEER project. The PIONEER project started in 2018, is currently in its last year. We have some extension, and I think like Eden, we are thinking about a sustainability phase where we can continue our work within PIONEER. PIONEER is about prostate cancer. It might be not so surprising since I work at the Department of Urology. And what we are aiming for in PIONEER is to define research questions, which we have, including all stakeholders, and we came up with 56 research questions that are pressing research questions within the field of prostate cancer, which we really would like to address. So the second phase is obviously to get the data together and try to, with all the tools you have heard here already today many times, OMOP these data, work together and try to address all these research questions within prostate cancer. So if we then see what we have been doing since 2018, you can see here that starting at the left, slowly data sets came in, were mapped, and were all contributed either in a central way or in a federated way. And currently we have 95 data sets identified. 23 are really ready to be used, 4 are in the pipeline or are currently being mapped to the OMOP common data model. And you can see on this slide that together we have an impressive number of subjects and patients that we can use within our PIONEER platform and analysis. So how do we address these 56 research questions that we have defined? Obviously not all at the same time, that's a little bit too much, but we decided also to use study-a-thons. And the first one was within the COVID period. It was completely virtual, which for me was my first study-a-thon, and I was totally confused with going to all different Teams, channels, rooms, and so on. But I try to follow it as much as possible. It is a collaborative effort, obviously. Without Odyssey and the help of the experienced people from Eden, this would never have worked within Pioneer. But we had an impressive number of participants. And for us, important is always that patients are actually included within our consortium. 20 countries, 5 time zones, which was also a challenge during this first study-a-thon. And it took us 5 days. We had 8 data sets with an impressive number of subjects available. What did we address in this first study-a-thon is typically something you can do with this real-world data, is to look at clinical characteristics of patients and long-term outcomes. And in this instance, it was prostate cancer patients treated with conservative management, which means more or less watchful waiting, which I now learn is also a challenge with cohort definitions. If you don't do anything, it's a challenge to find the right people. If you say they had surgery, it's already much easier to find a cohort. I learned a lot, I must say. So you can see that we had 527,000 patients were identified and 123,000 patients. We identified that this was quite some work, I can say, who did not receive curative or palliative treatment. And this was our cohort. Just to show you some results of this study-a-thon. And this is all about comorbidities, because what we really want to learn, what are these patients, what type of patients, and what do they have next to their prostate cancer. And here you see, for me, this is also interesting to see similar patterns throughout the large cohorts we used for this study-a-thon. And here you see the probability of being free from palliative or curative treatment. And over time, you see this decreasing. But for me, the important message is obviously that the graphs look more or less similar, that we do not have very strange different results here. The conclusions of our first study-a-thon, you can see here, which is all very important information for urologists and people treating prostate cancer, and obviously also the patients. All these conclusions we have written in a manuscript, and it has been accepted, and it is awaiting publication. So took us 2 years to come to the study-a-thon up to the publication, which is now ready to be made available. At the same time, we decided to address another research question while we were running this first study-a-thon. And again, you can see this is about clinical baseline characteristics and outcomes. And this is deferred palliative treatment. This is important information because we really want to know worldwide, in daily clinical practice, how many men get this palliative treatment for prostate cancer. A cohort of almost 18,000 men were identified. And here you see some results, again, about comorbidities. And again, a very nice overview of the different data sets. Here you see that we also looked, this is important information for cost-effectiveness studies, the emergency department visits and hospitalizations. When does this happen and how often does this happen? And these were all pressing research questions within prostate cancer management. Again, the manuscript for this study-a-thon, the results, is currently being drafted. So in 2021, first study-a-thon, completely virtual, and now 2 publications almost ready. And I can assure you that what we just heard this morning about all the problems that you encounter with cohort definitions, with heterogeneity of outcomes and data, we all have encountered that, for sure. It was quite a challenge, I can say, especially for someone who is used to work with study databases. This was a whole new field of work. Considering the success, we decided to do a second study-a-thon. This is last year, 2022. And here you already see an important question. We have so many treatment options in prostate cancer, and we really would like to know which treatment is best for which patient. And here you see such a question, and this question was obviously addressed in 2 parts. We need to have the characterization, and in the end we would like to predict, obviously, which treatment is best for which patient. And this study-a-thon was a hybrid event. We could sit together again, 35 participants. Again, the patients were there, who are very helpful actually in just telling their experiences and how to interpret certain data. 10 countries, 16 data sets, and we have now the study package successfully completed in 10 data sets. These are the plans for this study-a-thon. Obviously, we will write also a manuscript and work on the study packages. And we would like to have additional data. That's for sure, that holds for the whole of Pioneer. We will certainly continue with collecting more data sets in the sustainability phase. This is our main goal. The last study-a-thon, well, that's actually extremely recent. It's just 3 weeks ago. And here you see 53 participants, 9 countries, a 4-day event. 20 data sets identified. And here you see it is all about adverse events. Extremely important, as you can imagine, that people with advanced prostate cancer in the end get a lot of medication which is potentially harmful. And we really need to learn about all the adverse events of these people in real-world clinical practice. This study-a-thon obviously needs to be worked out further. You can see here that we will review the results, want more data sets here. We will characterize analysis, incidence rates analysis. And for this particular study-a-thon, there are actually 4 publications planned. So in summary, in Pioneer, we have since 2018 collected a lot of data sets, mapped them with all the legal issues that were there, with all the mapping efforts and so on, like we just heard this morning. But we are now in a phase where we actually try to solve these research questions that we have identified in the field of prostate cancer. But it is not all we do in Pioneer, because actually there's also, during these years, has been developed a very nice online search tool of all studies, all biomarkers and data that are available, so that you can really plan in the future, if you want to work within the field of prostate cancer, your future studies, and everything that is out there can be found in this online search tool in the Pioneer website. And as I said, Pioneer is in its 5th year. We have an extension at the moment. We are working on a sustainability form, like, for instance, we heard from Eden, and we are definitely set to continue this work within the field of prostate cancer. And then I would like to continue my presentation with the second project that is called OPTIMA, Optimal Treatment for Patients with Solid Tumors in Europe through Artificial Intelligence. It started last year, and like Pioneer, the basis is also bringing data together, map these data and use this data to increase, obviously, patient care and to make it more individual. What do we do in OPTIMA? First, here are the partners, 39 partners across 9 countries and in very different fields. And again, the patients are very well represented within our cohorts, within our consortium. What do we do in OPTIMA? Again, to establish a data catalog, to develop a secure and interoperable platform that is more or less similar to what we do in Pioneer. We are, in addition, aiming to develop a guideline decision support tool. And with this, you must think that guidelines for clinicians are currently in the format of a PDF file or a small card that which they have in their pocket, or a very thick book which they never read, obviously, because that's not so handy in daily clinical practice. And what we are aiming for is to develop within the electronic health record of the patient a decision tool what to do next based on the guidelines and the individual data of the patient. And in addition, we would like to optimize these decisions using artificial intelligence and obviously all the data we are going to collect. And again, sustainability is a key issue in this also. OPTIMA is not only prostate cancer, so for us working in the field of urology, we had to learn something else also, because OPTIMA also is for breast and lung cancer. These are the research areas in which we work, and obviously OPTIMA benefits a lot from Pioneer, because we have already a lot of data from prostate cancer, already identified research questions, and for breast and lung we will do that also. We have 9 work packages which are shown here, obviously the overall management package dissemination, and here you see the work packages, one dedicated to the guideline-based decision tool. We have a platform, a technical platform. We have data, obviously, and Dani knows all about work package 6. And I think Andreas is also in the room for work package 4, the platform. So what we are aiming for is a platform, data, a guideline-based decision tool, artificial intelligence, and trying to make decisions for patients individualized and of optimal quality. Here you can see how we work. Again, you see the knowledge gaps, and again, 3 cancers we are addressing, not only prostate, 3 cancers. Knowledge gaps, we have guidelines. Within guidelines, you have key recommendations on what to do, care pathways, and please note that guidelines are meant for the average patients, and this is exactly what we are aiming for, because there is actually no average patient. So what we are aiming for is, with the data, with artificial intelligence, with prediction tools, to get a better decision on what to do for a patient during the clinical care pathway. This is what, in a nutshell, we will test this in different hospitals throughout Europe, and in the end, improve decision-making at an individual level is the end goal of this project. It is now ongoing for a year. We had, I think, an impressive kickstart with OPTIMA, having obviously learned from all the other projects that are there. The whole legal structure is actually ready. So that is done, that's work package 2. Work package 3, which is my piece of cake within this project, among other things, is development of these research questions, which go to a Delphi procedure with all relevant stakeholders. So patients, pharma, clinicians, insurance company, everybody can give input for pressing research questions within the field of prostate, breast, and lung cancer. We have identified all the relevant clinical guidelines within Europe for the 3 cancer sites. We have prioritized them, and we have found the key recommendations. Work package 4, the data management plan has been finalized, and I think the platform is, I think, almost there. And Andreas, if I'm wrong, you can tell me later. Dani, your data collection is going very well, and obviously the prostate cancer data will come from Pioneer, and the breast and lung cancer data will be combined all together. So in a nutshell, within a year, within OPTIMA, we've made big steps, and we have learned, I think, a lot from Eden and from Pioneer and all the other initiatives. And we are really positive regarding the coming 4 years to achieve our goal. And with that, I would like to leave it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Roobol, for sharing that with us. And I'd like to ask all the speakers back onto the stage. I promised you all that we would have some time for questions. I know we are running late, but I want to stick to my promise. So we have 10 minutes for questions, and I'm going to open the floor soon. Just one thing I want to add to that last presentation. I'm very happy you emphasized sustainability there, because I think it's so important that the results of these projects, you know, live on in the future, and it's not end of project, exit, and we don't do anything with it. So keep that in mind for all the things you're doing. I have some questions prepared, but I've been talking enough, I feel. So I want to open up the floor to your questions. We have a box that I can throw around. Patrick, you did a really good job of throwing last year. Will you throw for me? Great. I actually asked Peter before if he had an insurance for this stuff, so I don't want to hurt anybody.
Who's got a question?
There's a question back there already. Great.
All right.
Whoa.
Opa.
Pretty good, pretty good. Oh, it's actually a microphone.
Yeah.
I suspected it is, but was not sure. Hi, my name is Eduard Korchma. My interest in data mapping. I wanted to ask something Maaike mentioned explicitly, but I guess it is a problem that affects any kind of federated data network when you convert various data sources to OMOP. I'm talking about creating custom standard concepts. When you map something and you have very specific stuff that does not fit in OMOP in principle or is not just yet present in OMOP, you have to create a standard concept for this. And I wanted to ask if this is a process that you tried to automate in a way or organize. How do you avoid duplications when you create standard concepts for various data networks? And if you're aware of any solutions for this that are established in the community.
Is this on? Okay. I think that's a great question. We've been working with Eden to create some custom concepts. So they have some software in place that helps us with the custom concept creation. I think in terms of like the ICD-03 codes that I mentioned, we've also been playing around with whether or not we can just extract parents from already existing and standardized concepts. So I think that's my limited answer at the moment. But there are some tools, and I think some of the Eden people in the room might also share some knowledge with you later.
Any other questions? Oh, you don't have to throw that far, Patrick, right behind you.
Yeah. A safe option. So I have a question for Carlos. You mentioned the Eden Mega Project, which sounds very, very interesting. I'm George Nicolaitis from Ergobyte. We have drug information from Greece. My question is regarding the drug shortages. Where do you get this data? Because it's very critical information that is not very easy to come by in general. So do you have access to market information and where the shortages are and their duration, etc.?
So this question is for Dani more than myself because he is leading the mega study, to be honest. Essentially,
yeah, just do it. Yeah.
There we go, Danny.
so while that was quick. That was quick.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in the mega study, we are going to be using primarily the information that's available in the European Medicines Agency shortage list. So there are some lists that have been made public, and that's the list of medicines we'll be exploring. The question is whether the information is reported from pharma. I don't know what the source of information is. I know it's in the European Medicines Agency website, but I don't know the source of that data. Maybe some other people here know. Do you want to add anything, Teresa? This is a long throw.
This is a little bit dangerous. Okay.
Just to add, I'm also part of the Eden Mega Study, and the EMA has this task force where obviously a lot of experts come together, and if there is a shortage in more than one European country, that ingredient would add up on that list. And we actually also talked to a lot of experts and created a list of medicines that was like on shortage during COVID in particular. So actually the list expands other than the EMA. And if you have more suggestions, I mean, all the data partners are welcome to join. The protocol is currently being circulated. And if you want to add drugs that you know have been in shortage in your own country, you're also welcome to add those to the list.
We would really like to join this protocol.
Yes, please. I think you can contact Montse and express your interest, so we'll be happy to have you. Where's Patrick? There you go.
You have to throw it. You can't just hand it.
You can throw it over. There's a question right in the middle.
Oh.
Front.
To get there. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to all the presenters, and it's a question to, I think, all of you. You described that you based your solutions on the platforms. Most of them are execution platforms. So what were the key factors when decided which platform to use? So what were those? Thanks.
Too technical for me, sorry.
That's an honest answer.
That's one for Michel, I think.
I'll get started. So the core solution is fully OMOP based. So we're also, in our case, we're using OMOP. We're actually also using the OHDSI tools. What we've done is actually build, almost call it a wrapper around it to make it easier and everything integrated so that people can use the tools. And on top of that, we've indeed then built simpler solutions than the full-fledged Atlas instance, for instance, because that requires always a certain level of expertise, so that people who don't have the time to actually get fully familiar with those tools still can make direct use of it, because that's important if we want to drive the improvement in the data quality. The shorter you make the cycle between usage and generation, the higher, the more incentive people will have to improve their own data quality.
Okay. Anybody else to add?
I mean, I can say a little bit about EURACAN. I think for us, there's a number of items that we obviously think are very important to consider when thinking about a platform. One is indeed the usability or user-friendliness for non-technical users, since we do anticipate that a lot of doctors will be using it, and they obviously don't have time to invest in learning OMOP. So I think in that sense, we're relying, or we're developing a user-friendly interface, which would potentially be also integrated, or like the Atlas tool will be integrated into that. I think another tool that's quite important is sort of like an overview of the data sources, like the catalogs that we've seen, and then particularly also what can be done with these data sources, because it's important to know which data sources need to be included in your research question, and whether or not you can actually answer your question with the databases that are available. So I think a lot of the attention goes to the users, the future users, and I think there's another element that's very important. That's the reproducibility and standardization. So we do rely on the ODYSSEY tools, but because we are talking about a federated learning network, that doesn't allow you to run the tools directly on your data source. It has to go via a central server, etc. We do have to make some modifications to the tools, but whatever tools, whatever software or algorithms that will be available, they will be standardized as well. To a user that might be considered a black box, like the ODYSSEY packages might be to some as well, but it does allow you to reproduce the studies just because it's standardized.
Thank you very much.
One more question? Anybody up in the balcony? I'd really like to throw it that far.
It's dark up there. It's hard to see.
Any hands up there?
Well, can I be devil's advocate then
Yeah.
and do a last question?
Yes.
I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but oh well, I'm going to do it anyway. I have a statement. And I think I would like some of you to respond to that. And it might be a bit of a harsh statement, especially for the group sitting here right now, but I'm going to throw it out there. And my statement is: specific disease networks are becoming obsolete with the onset of general global networks. Can you respond to that?
Perhaps in the future, but not now.
No, okay. Michel?
It would be fantastic if we become redundant.
No, but I mean, do you see it going that way? That we're saying, okay, we hope that. I mean, we were talking before about all the effort you've been putting into specific data collections besides what's being generated in general care. That we could actually get this data from the place where the physicians are, and that we don't need to put all this extra effort into having all these extra data sources. Is it possible?
Can I react?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think that would be wonderful. There's only one thing, what I'm a little bit afraid of is that in electronic health records, there's a lot of things stored, but not everything. So if you really have, like we in prostate cancer have defined 56 research questions, and you can imagine that that is not a low-hanging fruit. These are very particular questions, very difficult questions, most of them, for which you need certain data. And I'm still not convinced that everything is stored in an electronic health record.
No, and I know we're also facing the registration issues that a lot of the clinicians have, saying, I have to write so much down nowadays and I don't have time to talk to my patient anymore. So I don't think we can force them to record even more data. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see where the future is going to take us. Our very near future is going to take us to a coffee break. I think we all deserve that. We are going to shorten the coffee break a little bit. I'm not giving you half an hour. I'm going to ask you guys to be back in 20 minutes. Which should be at 11:45 about. Then we run 15 minutes late. Enjoy your coffee. If you have any more questions for the speakers, ask them during coffee, and let's give them another round of applause. Thank you very much.